Okay, hello everyone. I'm recording this to help you get through this PowerPoint. It's the first sort of real philosopher that we're going to be looking at, and it's a tricky theory, so make sure you're paying attention, pens out, ready to take notes, and let's go. So the first philosopher or moral theory that we're going to be looking at is from Immanuel Kant. He was a German philosopher. And he had a very, very, very strict idea of what morality was, and that was that it was our duty to be moral all of the time. There were no exceptions. You could not just break the rules or bend the rules once or twice. Any time that you were acting, you had to be moral at all times. So let's dive in and see how Immanuel Kant justified this idea. We refer to this moral theory or the rules that he set out as the categorical imperatives. So just a quick sort of background on it. So Kant's view of humans is defined by our ability to reason and to make decisions about what to do and not to do based on this reasoning. So he suggested that this is really what separates us from animals, our ability to reason. This is why we are moral beings, not what we might call amoral beings. So what we mean by that is no one looks at like a lion tackling a zebra out on the African plains and killing it and eating it and says, oh, that was an immoral thing for it to do. Why did the lion kill that zebra? We just see it as, well, that's just what lions do. We don't see their actions as either right or wrong. They're just actions. Humans, though, are different. We don't just view our actions as actions. We actually place a value on those. And that's really what morality is. It's us placing a value onto the actions that we perform. For Kant, the big difference between us and animals, why do we place value on our actions when we don't for animals, is that we can reason and we can think and we can decide what the right thing is to do. We're not just sort of slaves to our basic instincts as animals are. So Kant argued that the only real way that you can make a moral decision is by basing your actions on a set of rules that can be applied in absolutely any situation and will always lead you to the right choice. And he referred to these as maxims. So there are 3 maxims which he developed to help to guide our choices. So essentially in any behavior, if you ask yourself or apply these 3 maxims, it will reveal to you what the right action is. So Kant devised a simple test. This test is known as the categorical imperative. That's applying these 3 maxims. And through this, the last stop point there, he said actions should be chosen because they are right and avoided if they are wrong, rather than being defined by the consequences. Now, this hopefully you discussed a little bit yesterday, the idea of whether we place value on what we do based on the consequences they give us, or whether we place value on what we do based on the intentions that we have behind it. Kant is definitely a big intention person. You have to mean to do the right thing. You can't accidentally be moral. If you didn't mean to do the right thing, even if it turns out well, then you weren't being moral. If you were trying to do the right thing and it turns out badly, then you were still trying to be moral. So it's really not based on the consequences of your actions, rather the intentions that you had behind them. Okay? So let's start off with the first categorical imperative, which is commonly referred to as universality or the universal law. Okay. The first question Kant said we need to ask ourselves before acting is, would it be possible for absolutely everyone in the world to do what you're about to do every time they had the opportunity? Now, this might sound a little bit odd, but what Kant was trying to point out here is that if the answer is no, if everyone couldn't do what you're about to do, then no one should be allowed to. Because essentially you're then creating special rules for yourself that don't apply to others. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So this principle, in Kant's words, is act only on that rule whereby you can at the same time will or hope that it should become universal law. So this idea of universal law, that everybody should be allowed to do it every opportunity they got. Now, a common misconception about this is that it's based on like perception, like, oh, well, would I be okay with a world where everyone did this all the time? For example, stealing. Would I be okay in a world where everyone stole all the time? Well, some people's perceptions on right and wrong are pretty messed up, and they might say, well, I don't care if people steal or not. I want to steal, so fine, they can steal. I mean, it's stupid, but that's not what Kant is asking you to think about. What he's asking you to think about is, does it actually create a world that could logically exist? So let's use this example of stealing for a moment. If I'm thinking, I'm down at the local shops, I want a Freddo frog, I see it sitting on the shelf, I don't have any money, is it right for me to steal the Freddo? Well, what Kant would say is we need to ask ourselves whether everyone could do that every opportunity they got. And if we think about that, well, if everyone stole anything they wanted every time they wanted it, no one would ever actually own anything because everything would constantly be being stolen. And so therefore, stealing would actually be impossible because there would be nothing to steal because no one would actually own anything. So you see here, it's not about whether you think stealing is right or wrong. It's about whether it would even create a world that could possibly exist. If everyone stole all the time, then no one would own anything. Because think about it, as soon as you got something, someone would steal it. And then someone would steal it from them, and them, and them, and them, and them. Nothing would actually exist because it would constantly be being stolen. And so it creates a world that can't possibly exist. This, for Kant, is a prime example of something that simply cannot logically take place. So for him, something like stealing is wrong because if everyone did it all of the time, well, the action would actually be impossible because no one would own anything. Okay? Hope that makes sense. Hang on. So pause for a moment here. See if you can think of any other examples. Talk about this first imperative, and write a summary of it in your book, please. All right. Second categorical imperative. We need to consider whether in acting on this rule we are treating those involved as means or an end. So this is commonly referred to as treat others as ends in themselves. And what we mean by that is essentially no moral act can ever use someone against their will. Okay? So in no way can you actually manipulate someone else to get what you want, and have that act be moral. That sort of act will always be immoral. So in Kant's words, act in such a way that you will always treat humanity, whether in your own person, so yourself, or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. So we can never, ever, ever manipulate someone against their will or without their knowledge in order to achieve a end result. Okay? And what Kant pointed out here is that if we are manipulating people, then what we're essentially doing is we're ignoring the fact that they are moral beings as well. They are rational. They are able to choose their actions. And if we don't respect them for who they are, then we're abusing their own morality, if that makes sense. So, for example, should I just pass you in philosophy and popular culture in order to get paid more or to get a promotion or whatever? Now, on the surface, this might look okay. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a Year 10 elective, you're picking it because hopefully you're interested in the subject. Maybe you're thinking about doing philosophy next year. Could I just pass you? Absolutely. No one's really looking over my shoulder because no one really knows what goes on in a philosophy classroom but me. And so, could I do it? Absolutely. But what I'd actually be doing is I would be manipulating all of you in order to achieve an end for myself, which is, let's say, getting a raise. Not that that's how it works. Kant would say, well, that's just not the right thing to do. You can't do that. You have signed up to the class because you want to learn about philosophy. If I just pass you along, then I'm not really teaching you about philosophy. I'm not pushing you to get better at it if I don't, set a high standard for you. Okay? So, it might sound odd, but in that case, I would be using you. A famous example with this is lies. Is it ever okay to lie? So this includes white lies. In other words, lies that are seen to not do any harm. Is it ever okay to use to lie to someone? And Kant would say no, because anytime you do that, you're actually manipulating that person, and that is always wrong. So again, pause here. Write a summary of the categorical imperatives, have a think about it, have a chat about it. Alright, categorical imperative number 3. This is probably the trickiest one. It's commonly referred to as the moral king, and it's sort of a combination of the other two. So, Kant suggested that when assessing our rules, we need to imagine that we are lawmakers in a world in which everything is chosen for its own sake. So in other words, essentially you need to set the highest standard for yourself. You can't look around and go, well, that person should be more moral than me. No, you should be the absolute most moral person in the world. You need to imagine that everyone is basing their behavior off your example. So, in Kant's words, act as though you were, through your actions or rules, a lawmaking member of a kingdom of ends. Essentially what we're talking about here is, would you want to live in a society where the action that you're about to take is the law? Would you be comfortable living in that world? And again, remember, you need to have the perception that you are the absolute most moral person. So, in this society, no one will be more moral than you. Would you be comfortable with laws that are based off your actions? Is that the type of world that you would want to live in, or you would want your friends or family to live in? If the answer is no, well then you're not living up to the standard that you should be. Okay, so this is sort of about duty and responsibility. For Kant, you have the absolute highest level of responsibility. You are only ever responsible for your own moral actions, and so therefore you need to set the highest standard for yourself that you possibly can. What is the right thing to do? Again, pause here, summary, discuss. Alright, so just to finish up, for Immanuel Kant, goodness is defined by motivation. Remember, it's our intention behind the act, not the consequences of it. Essentially, if you're trying to do the right thing at all times, and you're applying the 3 categorical imperatives, then you are a good person. That's just the way that it works. If you're not, then, and you're waiting to see how it turns out, for Kant, you're not really a moral person. Okay? And Kant really said that your basis for action needs to be a sense of duty. You need to feel a sense of duty towards morality itself. You're not doing this for anyone else. You're not doing it for the world in general. You're actually doing it for yourself, so that you can say, yes, I am a moral person. So, if you don't want to be moral, then for Kant, well, then you're a lost cause. There's really no redeeming features about you if you don't want to be a moral person. That is the absolute basis of what being a good person is, according to Kant. Okay. So I'm running out of time here, but just a brief summary here of the categorical imperatives. You can read through it yourself, but that last dot point, Kant doesn't allow for exceptions or cases where it depends. This is an absolute law that he's talking about. There is no, well, just this once, I'll do this. Well, then you're not a moral person. You must be moral all the time, according to Kant. The last one is a few questions that I'd like you to answer in your book. So by the end of this, you should have a summary of Kant's categorical imperatives, and you should have answered these 3 questions in your book. I'd recommend having a chat to each other about number 2 to try and get some ideas. I hope this helps, and make sure that you are keeping up the discussion, please. I'll see you next year.